everyone. Welcome to those who haven't been here before. Welcome back to those who have watched before. Thanks for coming again. My name is Aaliyah Langley, and we are here to discuss the books I read in June 2025. I read five great books this month. June is my birthday month, so it's my favorite month, so I'm glad I had some good books to read this month. And let's just dive right in because I have a lot to say about a lot of them. So the first one I read in June 2025, and my 24th book for the year overall, is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is Hunger Games .5. I was really excited about this book when it was published a couple months before I read it, and it's a Hunger Games book. Obviously, this is the fifth one of them all. The Hunger Games, before I even talk about the book too much, let me give a little backstory. The Hunger Games books, I watched them, the movies, when they came out. The first two came out when I was in high school, and the other two came out, I think, my freshman year, or shortly after that in college. I always liked those movies, things like that. Never read the books though, and I read the first original trilogy like a couple years ago. I think maybe in 2019. If that's wrong, I'll put it somewhere. I liked those books a lot. Finally read those. I read Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes came out a couple years ago. I read that one, saw that movie. So when this was coming out, this story is all about Haymitch, who we meet in the original Hunger Games. He was a former victor from District 12, all these things. It was like, oh, this is exciting. I'll be able to read Haymitch's story, so I was really excited to read it. And my excitement continued to grow because I was waiting for it from the library. And as I was waiting for it, if you haven't heard, there's a movie on this book coming out that's coming out next year, like Thanksgiving time, 2026. And they were announcing the cast as the weeks were going on, and I kept waiting for the book, and I almost wanted to just go buy it. I was like, I'm just gonna wait. But my excitement kept growing with this book because I kept seeing the cast of the names I knew already, but also some names I hadn't known, and I would meet when I actually read the book myself. But it was just getting my excitement up. And when it finally came, I was actually reading the book that I'm going to talk about for book 25. I was reading that book first, and I stopped that book, and I said, "You're gonna have to wait. I finally got Hunger Games book. Let's dive in and read it." So let me give you a little synopsis on it. I think that was kind of good enough. Like I said, it's about Haymitch. But here we go. As the day dawns on the 50th annual Hunger Games, fear grips the districts of Panem. This year, in honor of the Quarter Quell, twice as many tributes will be taken from their homes. Usually in the Hunger Games, it's 24 people were taken to the Hunger Games, 2 from each district. This year it was 48. It was double, like I said, twice as many. Back in District 12, Haymitch Abernathy is trying not to think too hard about his chances. All he cares about is making it through the day and being with the girl he loves, who is Lenore Dove, Lenore Dove Baird, actually, who was a little Sigma from the Hunger Games 0, the one with songbirds. Anyway, let me focus on this book. When Haymitch's name is called, he can feel all his dreams break. He's torn from his family and his love, shuttled to the capital with the 3 other District 12 tributes, a young friend who's nearly sister to him, a compulsive odds maker, and the most stuck-up girl in town. As the games begin, Haymitch understands he's been set up to fail, but there's something in him that wants to fight and have that fight reverberate far beyond the deadly arena. Really great book. So the thing is with this, we knew Haymitch goes to the Hunger Games. We knew he wins the Hunger Games. So it's like, you're prepared for that. But I have to say, like, 2 chapters in, I remember when I actually got this book, I talked about it on my Instagram stories a little bit. I was so, like I said, I was so excited to read it, drove in to read it right away. And the first 2 chapters, it was just like, oh, okay. The things you expect to happen are different. Again, like I said, we expected Haymitch to be picked for the Hunger Games. We expected him to win the Hunger Games, all those kind of things. But those first 2 chapters were like a wake-up call for me to be like, okay, let's not say like we know how, like I thought I knew how the Reaping was going to go. The Reaping went completely different than what I thought it was going to be. Like the first 2 chapters, I remember just being like, I was already like so heartbroken. I was already so heartbroken, already so shattered, shocked. And I saw a quote from someone on Goodreads said, "Suzanne Collins, you are a sick and twisted individual. Thank you." Because it really was just like, those first 2 chapters were like, I feel like for a lot of Hunger Games fans, we were kind of like don't think you're going to know how this is going to go. And then we kept having these moments throughout the book, and especially as the games began and even after the games, things like that. I was said in my review here, like, Sunrise on the Reaping was a harrowing, horrifying, tragic, compelling, heartbreaking, and nostalgic book. Let me finish that. Susan Collins, you really did it again. I say in the nostalgia piece because there was a lot of moments in there of like taking back to moments from the original trilogy, honestly, like a lot of characters. I kept like kind of highlighting names. Also, I should say, if you follow me on Goodreads, you could see all my like highlights and notes from all the names that we had known from the original trilogy, because I feel like the book, the 0 book, the Songbirds of Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Obviously, that was so long ago. Where this was like Haymitch's, like, he has friends who we are going to meet in the trilogy, like Katniss's family or Peeta's family, or things like that we like had known or whatever, or Effie and other things like that. People we knew in the original trilogy and got to explore more a little bit in those times. We got to kind of meet them in this Haymitch like origin story essentially. So that was like a nice piece. I feel like for people who were fans of the books, fans of the movies, whatever, it was like a nice little moment for them. And I'm sure when the film comes out as well, it'll be like a nice thing as well for see those kind of names pop up. And who knows how much they actually will cast some of the smaller minor characters like Katniss's parents or things like that. But nice little things. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Like I said, I was getting excited for it as I was waiting to get it. It was a really good book. I feel like if you haven't seen The Hunger Games or read the books, I feel like you would still enjoy this book, and it would be like a nice jumping off point to the next, to go to the original trilogy. Let's say like the last chapter, maybe it was the epilogue or something like that of the book, is talking about like Haymitch like a couple of years later, and he's like with Katniss and Peeta now a little bit, and it's like a very short kind of chapter. But I feel like if you were to end there, be like, okay, now let me go like read the trilogy. And those movies were so big, you probably know like a little bit of that story already. But I feel like if you hadn't read the books at all or whatever like that, it'd be a nice book to like read this one and jump off. Or you can even go back to the one that's before all of this, the Songbirds. And there's some moments of nostalgia from that kind of community as well. The Covey community, the Baird, like I said, Lenore Dove Baird, she's a Covey and all these kind of things, which is a callback to, Lucy Gray Dove, I think. Maybe I'm saying it wrong, but, all that kind of stuff. Hunger Games madness continues. Suzanne Collins, great job. Shattering book, heartbreaking book. Like I said, all those things I described before, the harrowing, horrifying, tragic, compelling, heartbreaking, nostalgic, so many things mixed in. Great book, definitely recommend. I was spewing all this time, I never said what I actually gave the book as a rating. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Solid read. Happy for that to be my first one of June 2025. All right, next book. This is the book I actually was reading before that last one, but I stopped it when I got that book because I said I want to read the last book first. So book 26 for June 2025 is We All Live Here by Jojo Moyes. Good book. Let me jump right in before I got too far down. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Jojo Moyes is the author I like a lot. She wrote the Me Before You trilogy. I only have the first book here, but this dropping the book. Gosh. But this book, this trilogy, it's Me Before You, it's Me Before You, After Me, and Still Me. I read this book actually. I should focus on We All Live Here, but let me actually talk about this quickly. I read the Me Before You book, and then subsequently the other ones as well. After I saw the movie with who's in it again? It's speaking of Hunger Games, the guy who plays Finnick Odair's in it. What's his name again though? Sam Claflin, and then the girl who was in Game of Thrones. I never watched Game of Thrones, but I forget her name. I want to know what her name is. Let me look it up. Emilia Clarke. They are in that movie. It's such a good movie. When I went to go see it in the cinema, it came out like years and years ago. When I went to go see it, when I tell you, I'm a pretty emotional person, but there's few movies that make me cry and like ugly cry. Me Before You was one of those. I was sobbing. I was ugly crying. It was like tears everywhere in that movie. And I went back a little bit later. I think I brought my mom to it. I think my sister came as well. And all of us. My sister doesn't even cry like that. She's not like a crier, really. She just cried a little bit. My mom and I are both, we were crying. My mom doesn't really cry either, but we were crying. We were crying that movie, Me Before You. Excellent film. And so I read the books after seeing the film. And again, like I said, the second and third one as well. Always really liked those. Jojo Moyes has come out with a couple other books since then. I think I've read almost every book of hers that's come out the past several years or so. So when I saw this one was coming out, I was like, oh great, another Jojo Moyes book. Let's dive in and read it. Let me talk about the synopsis of We All Live Here. Lila Kennedy has a lot on her plate. A broken marriage, 2 wayward daughters, a house that is falling apart, and an elderly stepfather who seems to have quietly moved in. Her career is in freefall and her love life is complicated. So when her real dad, a man she has barely seen since he ran off to Hollywood 35 years ago, suddenly appears on her doorstep, it feels like the final straw. But it turns out even the family you thought you could never forgive might have something to teach about love and what it actually means to be family. So we meet this lady, this 42-year-old Lila Kennedy, who's in this kind of like up and down period of her life. Like I said, she is a mother of 2. She's recently divorced. Her stepfather's basically moved in with kind of like they said, quietly. her biological father is coming into her life. She's trying to date. She's trying to write this book or write something. Like, she's struggling with her career, all these kind of things. So the synopsis is good. It kind of grabs you. Honestly, I hadn't even really read the synopsis before picking up the book. I just was like, oh, Jojo Moyes. And I literally got it from the library. That was literally all it was. I didn't even need to hear anything else about it. Like as I said, I've been reading Jojo Moyes novels for a bit. So the premise is good, things like that. I will say I gave it 3 out of 5. So the book was kind of just like all right to me. It was a little bit slow and dragging at moments. Definitely has some of that like heart and funniness that you kind of expect from a Jojo Moyes read, which I always enjoy. But it was like kind of like, it took me a while to get into it. So, which I mean isn't bad, but I kind of almost at the part where it was like, times it kind of felt flat or like unnecessarily like drawn out for me, to be honest. And the pacing was kind of like one of my biggest issues with it. I feel like it almost feels like by the time we got to the end, there was like a lot maybe going on or whatever like that, I was already kind of tired of like, oh, this has kind of been dragging for a little bit. I just wanted to finish. But it wasn't a bad read, but it was kind of just one of those things where it was like I could never really like get into it as much as I wanted to, or like really like hold on to the characters or hold on to the story. I was more so kind of just like, and like I said, even so much so where usually if I have a book I really enjoy, obviously I want to get through it, but like I was reading this book, I was kind of dragging it for a while, and then I got the Hunger Games book, and I stopped this book, and I said, let me read the Hunger Games book. And to be fair, the Hunger Games book took me only a couple of days to get through, because it was one of those where I wanted to just to hurry up and get through it. And then I came back to this one, and honestly, I had to like hurry up as well, because I remember I when I finished this book, I was visiting family, and I had the Kindle, and it was like gonna expire within a couple hours, and I had to like finish before it was gonna go, and that was one of those really like, okay, let me just hurry up and get through it. But I felt that way myself as well. Kind of just like, I had this book I still have to finish, so let me just like get through it, and that's kind of how I felt on it. But I did give it a 3 out of 5, so it's not the worst rating, I guess, but that's just where I am with it. So that was book 25 for June 2025. All right, next book we have book 26 for the year. Book 3 for June is Matriarch, a memoir by Tina Knowles. I actually have it here. Matriarch, Tina Knowles. I wasn't sure I was going to read this book. My sister purchased it, and thank you for letting me borrow your copy. And I was kind of like, yeah, I probably would read it like at some point. Like I shouldn't say I didn't know I was going to read it. I didn't know I was going to read this book so soon. Like the book just came out, I think in May maybe, and I was like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. Probably, like I said, my sister was going to buy it, and I said I would borrow it from her, or whatever. Great. But it ended up actually being the selected for our book club that I'm in. My sister's in as well. So then I was like, okay, I guess I'm reading it now. So I read it in May, or maybe it came out in April. No, not May. I'm getting myself confused. I read it in June. It was our June pick. And yeah, let's talk about the synopsis of it quickly. You are Celestine, she said. She squatted to push the hair out of my face and pull the leaves off my pajama legs. Like my sister and my grandmother, they're under the pecan tree, as she did countless times the day my mother told me stories of the mothers and daughters that went before me. Tina Knowles, the mother of iconic singer-songwriters Beyonce Knowles Carter, Solange Knowles, and bonus daughters Kelly Rowland, is also, I should mention, they don't have it here, but Angie Beyonce is a niece of hers, but she considers her a daughter as well. Anyways, is known to the world over as a matriarch with a capital M, a determined, self-possessed, self-aware, and wise woman who raised and inspired some of the great artists of our time. But this story is about so much more than that. Matriarch begins with a precocious if unruly little girl growing up in 1950s Galveston, the youngest of 7. She was in love with the world and with the extended family on every other porch, and the sounds of Milltown and the lapping beach always within earshot. But as the realities of race and the limitations of girlhood set in, she begins to dream of the world beyond her instincts, and impulsive nature drives her far beyond the shores of Texas to discover the life awaiting her on the other side of childhood. That lifelong journey through grief and tragedy, creative and romantic risk and turmoil, the nurturing of superstar offspring, and her own special gifts is the remarkable story she shares with readers here. This is a page-turning chronicle of family love and heartbreak, of loss and perseverance, and of the kind of creativity, audacity, and it will take you from a girl from Galveston to change the world. It's one brilliant woman's intimate and revealing story, and a multi-generational family saga that carries within the story of America and the wisdom that women pass on to each other, mothers, daughters, across generations. Yeah. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Really, really good book. I honestly will say. I feel like to some level, many people might pick up this book because they're like, oh, it's Beyonce's mom, or it's Solange Kelly's mom, whatever. And they obviously, there are going to be some people who are going to come from that angle. But rightfully so, it is a memoir, and I'm happy to a sense that we were able to focus on her story, and even though it was like around them. And don't get me wrong, I you can't see, I have like over here, I have the Renaissance cup here. I am a true Beehive member. I've been for a long time. I have a picture of Beyonce right there from the Renaissance. Anyways, I'm Beehive down. I'm seeing Beyonce this weekend. Beehive down. So I've known about Miss Tina. Like I followed the journey to things like that. But it was very nice in terms of like hearing from her story. And like I said, it's a memoir. So if some people would pick this book up and be like, oh, we're going to hear about like the early years of like how Beyonce was, or like Destiny, like sure, there's some of that, but it's not about them. And it was really about being able to hear about her and how she was able to come through all these different things in her marriage. Obviously, she was married to Matthew Knowles for many, many years. Kind of like a messed up marriage, cheating all the time, things like that, up and down. Got married again years later and talks us through that and like that subsequent divorce and things like that. And yeah, I think it was quite the story, and she lived quite the life, and it was broken in 3 parts, like her life in childhood, and then kind of like when she got married, and then becoming a mother, and then the last part, I forget what the last part's called. Let's just pull up the book here and actually look to see what but the last piece is kind of like, you know, when she's like older, like in the grandma role more. So Act 1 is a daughter, Act 2 is a mother, and Act 3 is a woman. Lovely. Yeah, and it really takes you through those different stages of her life and where she is now, and she reveals how she was diagnosed with breast cancer towards the end of the book, and she actually was able to, luckily they found it early enough where she was able to, you know, get surgery for it. And but like those kind of like reminders that you have in terms of like being able to put yourself first. This is her on the back here. Being able to put yourself first, being able to, even though you obviously put your children first for so many years, finally get into that place of knowing that it's okay for it to be about me sometimes. And the book was just I feel like just very enjoyable, very vulnerable, heartfelt, engaging. I really, really enjoyed it, honestly. And I think you would too. So if you want to read that is Matriarch book, what is this, book 3 for the month of June, book 26 overall. Great book. I actually want to add one more little note about Matriarch, which I liked, and I was talking with some people about. I feel like there's been this narrative of like, and rightfully so to some level, like he was great, about like how Matthew Knowles really was like so responsible, apart from the girl's talent and Destiny's Child and things like that, for getting them in the places and helping them be successful and all these kind of things, and being the manager and doing all these great things. But I really liked how it wasn't like she was trying to like say like, oh, but no, don't look here. It wasn't even like that at all. But it was like talking about Miss Tina's contributions in terms of like being the one who designed their clothes for many years when they were doing deals and things like that. Not necessarily being always one in the room, but kind of being the one that maybe they would speak to after, or they'd get her opinion on, all those types of things. Even before all of that, or as that was kind of emerging, she became the breadwinner of the house because she had a very successful hair salon called Headliners, and Matthew was able to quit his job and be able to dedicate his time to Destiny's Child, and she was able to pay the bills. Like, it was like that in terms of that financial burden of like being able to be that one, and even at times where he like would use some of their money to help Destiny's Child continue on. It was like Miss Tina was the one to be able to like even give them the legs a lot of the times to have that be able to happen. And I feel like sometimes that's been forgotten in a sense because maybe she was more behind the scenes, and she seemed like she's that way anyway. And obviously, like I said, Matthew was the manager, all these things. And obviously it's not like, and obviously we have those girls who were just incredibly talented, and so many of them are so successful. All of them are so successful today and things like that. I like that in terms of like, if some people didn't know about that history or know about those things, it was like, and it's a way to be like, yeah, Alex, you know, I was able to contribute so much, and still does. She was talking about when the Renaissance tour was happening, how she was able to help like pick the stylist and all these things to be able to meet the dreams and the vision that Beyonce had for the show and things like that, and all types of great stuff that she is still continuing to do. And so I like that piece. So yeah, that's Matriarch. Move on to the next book. All right, book 4 for June 2025 and 27 for the year overall is American Prison, a reporter's undercover journey into the business of punishment by Shane Bauer. I had this book on my to-read list for a while, and I remembered it again because It was on a couple when this came out. The book was published in 2018. Was it 2018? Yeah, 2018. It was on Barack Obama, former president of the United States, does these at the end of the year, like, here are my favorite books from this year, my favorite songs, my favorite movies, whatever. And this book was on that list all those years ago. And I had, usually when he has those lists out, if I haven't read any of those books, I like add them to like maybe my list, or if I like look them up and see if I'm interested in them. And that was the book I was interested in, so I have done just that. Excellent book. Before I dive into much further, before I forget, I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads for my rating. Let me read a little synopsis on American Prison. In 2014, Shane Bauer was hired for $9 an hour to work as an entry-level prison guard at a private prison in Winfield, Louisiana. An award-winning investigative journalist, he used his real name. And in this book, Bauer weaves a much deeper reckoning with his experiences, together with the thoroughly researched history of for-profit prisons in America, from their origins in the decades before the Civil War, for as he soon realized, and focus on this quote here because this is really important, we can't understand the cruelty of our current system and its place in the larger story of mass incarceration without understanding where it came from. Private prisons became entrenched in the South as part of the systemic effort to keep the African American labor force in place in the aftermath of slavery, and the echoes of these shameful origins are still with us. This book is exceptional. As I said, it's like an on-the-ground book. He's in the prison, rather. It's Wynn Correctional Center. He's in this prison. He's giving us his experience, and he's giving us this kind of detailed history of for-profit prisons in the United States and all these kind of things. And like I said, that last little bit of the synopsis, which I actually include in my review as well, I think is important. Talk about how, private prisons became entrenched in the South as part of the systemic effort to keep African American labor force in place in the aftermath of slavery, and the echoes of it are still with us today. One of the greatest books I've ever read, and one I highly, highly recommend, is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. You probably have heard this. This book is very well lauded. It's one of the most excellent books I've ever read in life. And like I said, I recommend it to everybody I could speak to. And this book, okay, let me just say when I read this book some years ago, it provided statistics on what many of us already knew and recognized, that, which is referred to in that kind of quote I was talking about, how they wanted to kind of, after slavery was over, how could we keep the African American labor force in place, and those kind of things. And Bauer built on this understanding for me in terms of providing more or similar statistics on history of the prison system, while also being able to offer the narrative while working in the facility he was working in, Wynn Correctional Center, which is a part of, it's now called Core Civic, but when he was working there, when this book was written and things like that, it was previously known as Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, until their 2016 rebrand. The changes and the tensions he observes in himself after his only 4 months in the prison, and also provide statistics about Wynn and CCA as a whole. For-profit prisons are big business, and because of that, they are difficult to dismantle, tackle, or reform. Bauer details how getting into the prison business was a heck of a venture for a young man, could make a lot of money. This background helps us understand how we arrived at our current state, as Bauer worked in Wynn in 2014, and the state of for-profit prisons, American prisons as a whole, which is both eye-opening and heartbreaking, yet infuriating. And it's infuriating because, like I said, it's kind of like, it's a big business. So a lot of times with big businesses, they're not going to easily go away. A lot of people are making a lot of money off of them. And as we said, it's a heck of a venture to get into for a young man, with people who he details, like people who were first getting into it and how that came to be. But I brought up The New Jim Crow because, like I said, it was another one of those books where, if you don't know a lot about prisons, which I feel like a lot of people don't really think about, things like that, maybe you've just seen Prison Break, great show, but it was like books like this, and also American Prison here, are ones that can really help open your eyes, help give you insight into like what's actually going on, and how it even began, all those kind of things, and all that. Excellent. So reading this book made me think about a book I read last year. I read it in February last year, called We Do This Till We Free Us by Marianne Cava. I will link my book talk to that book below. I read that February 2024. So I thought about that book because, is abolition, in the book, one of the early questions posed is abolition too drastic? Can we really get rid of prisons and policing altogether? This, like I said, the question is posed early in the book, and it was the question I kind of had when I picked up the book, and upon finishing it, I still had more of an investigation I needed to do, and like recognize that society is still a long way to go but I'm grateful to read Kaba's work and to continue the challenge and to continue to challenge the ideas and beliefs that society has told us that we should believe. And that's where I was when I read that book last year, and this book again just brought that book up again for me and thinking about the whole prison abolitionist movement, and I consider myself an abolitionist in that sense, honestly. Reading books like American Prison and The New Jim Crow make me want to tear the system down altogether. As it is clearly broken and corrupt, it is easy to forget about prisoners. Many people do not know anything about the things discussed in this book, as I was talking about before. You may have just seen Prison Break. Again, great show, I recommend it. But it's not always real life. But Bauer shedding light on what is happening in American prisons and CCA and other for-profit companies is so important to continue or begin this important conversation on prisons because they are so broken. I will say actually as well, I think it was just shortly after I read this book, I had been going through these old John Oliver clips last week's time with John Oliver, and one of the videos that he had was on prisons. It might have been from season 1 or before, but he posted a bunch of these things on YouTube, or his team does rather. And one was on prisons, and he actually mentions CCA, and they're one of the biggest for-profit prison organizations, companies, whatever. I will link that prison clip below where he talks about it. I like John Oliver a lot because he talks about very important things, but you can give kind of sometimes a comedic take to it, which sometimes is good for people to kind of have like breathers and a lot of heavy information. But yeah, I recommend watching that clip. I recommend reading American Prison, reading The New Jim Crow, reading We Do This to Free Us. Get some more information about a lot of these things because it's definitely important. Like I said, it's easy to forget about the things happening if they don't affect you in your personal life, but it's something that we should be paying attention to and trying to do things to change, definitely. All right, book 5 for June 2025, the last book of this month and the 28th of the year overall, is The Whiteness of Wealth, How the Tax System Impoverishes Black Americans and How We Can Fix It by Dorothy A. Brown. Who knew I would be reading a book and so engaged with the book about taxes from a tax attorney and tax professor, Dorothy A. Brown, that she is there. Great book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I'm not a tax person at all. I'm lucky enough to have someone else handle my taxes. It's not my thing. I'm a math person, so I'm down with the math, but it's still sometimes like hearing about sometimes reading math text are interesting. But like I said, who knew I'd be so engaged in a book about taxes, about math, about statistics, all things I kind of like. I wouldn't say I enjoy math or statistics. I'm good at them, but I don't necessarily enjoy them. Taxes are not something that are really like on my I would say on my radar, but like I said, I don't have to deal with them usually. Someone else can just do that for me, and it's great. But let me give a synopsis on this book before we dive into more of my thoughts. Dorothy A. Brown became a tax lawyer to get away from race. As a young black girl growing up in the South Bronx, she'd seen how racism limited the lives of her family and neighbors. Her law school classes offered a refreshing contrast. Tax law was about numbers, and the only color that mattered was green. But when Brown sat down to prepare tax returns for her parents, she found something strange. James and Dottie Brown, a plumber and a nurse, seemed to be paying an unusually high percentage in their income in taxes. When Brown became a law professor, she set out to understand why. I'm gonna talk about that whole moment with her parents in a little bit because that was very eye-opening for her. In The Whiteness of Wealth, Brown draws on decades of cross-disciplinary research to show that tax law isn't as colorblind as she once believed. She takes us into her adopted city of Atlanta, introducing us to families across the economic spectrum whose stories demonstrate how American tax law rewards the preferences and practices of white people while pushing black people further behind. From attending college to getting married to buying a home, black Americans find themselves at a financial disadvantage compared to their white peers. The results are ever-increasing wealth gap and more black families shut out of the American dream. Solving the problem will require a wholesale rethinking of American tax code, but it will also require both black and white Americans to make different choices. This urgent, actionable book points the way forward. I'll talk about that as well because she actually gives solutions, which I really appreciate. So I actually want to talk about quickly the moment with her parents, and it's just kind of how the book opens. She's talking about how she talks about this moment where she sees this supposed acts of racism stuff happening, this police brutality and things like that, and again she's kind of coming to consciousness in terms of the treatment of certain citizens in certain places, things like that, really everywhere, honestly. And she's like, I want to get into tax law, I want to get into taxes because my color doesn't matter. As long as it's green, it's good. Years later, she's making like $75,000, something like that, she says, and she has her parents' taxes, and they're each are making about equal what she makes, but like individually, but they file together. They're a married couple. And she's like, my tax rate is lower than theirs. Why is theirs? Wait a minute. And she's like, and she realizes, hold up, and like starts to realize what's happening in terms of like going on this investigation of like, why are their taxes higher than, like, what's like what? Basically, like this like shocking moment of like looking at this, a tax lawyer, a tax professor, and being like, this is, again, like what's going on, and is able to dive in from that point, or was interested in to kind of like I said, understand why it is this way. And it's like an eye-opening moment for her. The Whiteness of Wealth is it's a quote here. Whiteness of Wealth is a great addition to the current slate of popular conscious-raising books about the Black experience in the United States. I'm not sure if I said it, but I gave this a 4 out of 5. Excellent book. As I said, taxes. I don't know much about taxes at all, but I still don't know that much about taxes. Not as much as obviously this person does has a career, but I'm just happy to kind of get this lesson from our tax attorney and tax lawyer, our tax attorney and tax professor, Dorothy Brown. I have another quick quote here. The Whiteness of Wealth is a rigorously researched book about the tax system and the racial inequities that have been built into the system. End of quote. Sometimes you hear people complain about why is everything about race, and anyone who's actually awake in the United States or other places as well, but especially the U.S., it's always about race. Thinking about, some of you might remember if you've been here before, a book I read in December 2024 called "Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race?" 25 Arguments That Won't Go Away by Keith Boykin. I read that in December 2024. I'll link that below. People complain about that, but then when you actually dig into these systems, it's like, oh, this is another thing and another thing. It's what it feels like. It's always, and even Dorothy Brown, again, tax professor, tax lawyer, were surprised to say, why is it not all about green? Why is it not all just about the money? Like what there's in here too, type of thing. This book was eye-opening to me in learning about the history of the tax system and how it was designed for certain types of people and families. It also highlighted how even today, each April 15th, the victim class continues to grow. This is happening. Like, that like the wealth gap is growing and things like that, but the Whiteness of Wealth really spells it out for you, and with the research, personal testimonies from the author's own family. She talks about her parents often, and other people. She interviewed both Black and white to kind of help lay this groundwork to open your eyes to what's happening and how the tax system in the United States needs an overhaul. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I appreciated how Brown proposed several options for moving things to a more equitable place. It is easy for anyone to write a book with all the problems, but having proposed solutions to this progress, such as legal challenges some proposals may face, and even offers alternative proposals that wouldn't encounter the specific legal challenges or obstacles, I like. And having actual solutions offered by Brown is very helpful, because you can leave this book thinking about the future and how it can change and how to continue, and now you can continue this conversation with other people rather than just like the complaints. And it's an excellent book. I think it's a must read, and as I said, who knew I'd be so engaged or so engrossed in a book about taxes, but I really was. I actually want to read a review I saw on Goodreads from someone named Ross Blotcher. I liked their review, and I'm going to read it for you here. So they start with the quote that I said earlier: "The Whiteness of Wealth is a great addition to the current slate of popular conscious-raising books about the Black experience in the United States. Dorothy A. Brown is a law professor and tax policy expert who makes the case that taxation, schooling, housing, and other financial systems have been carefully crafted to exclude Black Americans and make it harder for them on average to accumulate wealth. I've been rather surprised to see how strongly some people react to the title alone, launching into counter-arguments without having read the book. Brown's prepared for these objections and presents a thorough, nuanced, and well-researched series of arguments that I find the balance between statistical underpinning and personal narrative. You'll be forgiven, as I needed to be, for assuming that the tax system is fairly race-neutral, as it appears to be on paper, with equal opportunity for anyone to succeed. That's the American dream, right? Anyone can rise to the top with enough grit and effort. Brown demonstrates a lot of crafty ways, however, in which Blacks are constantly at a disadvantage. For example, filing jointly better serves a married couple than a single earner, whereas two earners with even the same net earning, a more common situation for Black couples. Let me pause on that actually. A lot of Black families, both the husband and the wife work, whereas a lot of times, especially in the early taxation like system days and things like that, it was the man in the white families. The man was working, the wife was at home. Whereas still today we see, even in high earning couples, a lot of times the Black women are working as well. and how that right away is kind of how that can mess up your tax system. If your tax rate, if you're both working, even if you're making the same amount of money, people across the street, it's you can be charged more. Let me pick up. So, where was I? Yeah, end up paying more. Black earners are more likely to raid their savings to support their parents rather than their kids, assuming that less wealth is passed throughout the family. Housing values driven down as Black occupancy increases in a neighborhood, making it hard for Black families to obtain houses, let alone reap the kind of investment that white people do. This is a point she talks about a lot in terms of like some of the changes that need to happen. Sometimes Black people move into neighborhoods and white people leave, or white people only see a neighborhood as valuable or things like that, or school, or whatever it is. If there's how many white people are in this neighborhood, how many white people are at the school, those kind of things like that. It's kind of personal things that people have in their mind. It's not even necessarily systemic, but it's kind of like that racism that kind of plays in people's minds where they only want to move into like other white neighborhoods, things like that. We saw that a lot when Black people were able to buy houses. People were moving out of their homes and they were being sold for much more expensive for Black people and things like that, whatever it is. All that stuff is still going on. Housing value is driven down, like I said, when people move in. These differences can be measured in dollars. For-profit colleges saddle Black students with loans that do not equal the value of the degree. That particular chapter covered a lot of material I'd never heard. I want to talk about that too. I'm going to keep just putting in my little 2 pence with these reviews from this person. The loans piece as well. And I will say Dorothy Brown interviewed Black people, interviewed white people, things like that. And even some of talk about, again, like to say like student loan debt and how a lot of times a lot more Black people have student loans or other minorities, things like that. A lot of times some white people were able to have, maybe because of the value of their home, as in terms of like a huge equity, they're able to kind of pay for student loans for their kids, things like that. And even some of the people she interviewed didn't necessarily understand how much of an advantage that was to be able to have not have to worry about loans because they had, their grandfather put some money for them in their account or whoever it was. That's such obviously a big advantage in the future, things like that. All types of different things. Excellent chapter, excellent research she did there. In these, back to the review here from the guy, in these and many subtle ways, rules that don't explicitly punish Black people are still geared to disadvantage typical Black behavior. Brown highlights these distinctions, presents relevant statistics, and details the history that led to the current situation. Many seem to feel that admitting there are disadvantages for Black Americans is a referendum on their own efforts to get ahead or make their gains ill-gotten, and puts them on the defensive. That is not the point being made. Getting by can be difficult for everyone, but there are not material ways in which the system is particularly rigged against poor and especially Black Americans. Almost all of us have benefited from these discrepancies without consciously meaning to. And yes, Brown readily points out that poor whites and other racial groups are also disadvantaged, and there are additional stories that could be told about these communities, but there's a very specific and clear story about Black wealth in the U.S., and that's what this book is here to accomplish. And talks about how it's very easy for a book to establish that there was a problem, but they were impressed about actually having solutions at hand, and she acknowledges a lot of the roadblocks, things like that I spoke about before. And he says, ends the review kind of with I found myself wishing I could appoint Brown to the Treasury. There's so much food for thought here, and it's a relatively quick read and in-depth material. The depth of material it presents. It's a really exceptional book. It dives into so many different avenues of why the tax system is broken, things like that, and how there are all these advantages that are kind of hidden into the system, and actually gives you, like I said, proposed solutions on how we can kind of get over some of those things and change the way it is to kind of make it more equitable, more all these kind of things. And again, thinking about how the system needs an overhaul, it made me think as well about a book that I read last month, that The System by former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich. I'll link this one below too for my talk for this, because this is another one. It's one of those books where it was the system needs an overhaul. I bought these 2 books. I bought 7 books all at the same, I think it was 7 books all at the same time. I'll put a picture of them here, and I'll look up some more economic type text to read, and these are the first 2 that I've read. I'm going to keep making my way through the list, and yeah, they go right off the back of each other, really, it feels like, to some level. But this one, Whiteness of Wealth, obviously is focusing on taxes and all those kind of things, and it's eye-opening. Who knew I would be so, like I said, I'm going to say it again, so engrossed in a book about taxes, but I really was, and I think it's a must-read. All right. Those are the 5 books I read in June 2025. As I mentioned before, look at my Goodreads at Aaliyah Langley. You could see all my highlights, my notes on all these books I've read this month. You can see what I thought about certain things and whatnot. Read my reviews in full if you'd like to do that. All that good stuff. See what I'm reading early. And yeah, keep going on with the story, I guess of it. Have you read any of these books? Comment below. Any recommendations for me? Comment below. All the good stuff. Anything bookish, hit me below so we could talk about anything it is. Thank you guys so much for watching and being here. I really appreciate it. And I'll be back next month to talk about books again when we finish up July. All right. Bye-bye.